Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a chilling collection of haunted house stories for you to enjoy. But before we begin, my friend Dane, who runs the channel Being Scared, has produced a feature-length film titled Gale, and I'd like to show you the trailer.
They told me Oz was just a story. A fairy tale my grandmother dreamed up after the storm.
How do you know Dorothy?
I don't.
Then why are you here? For nearly 20 years. Since I've known her, she can't have said more than 4 words to me.
My mother tried to bury our secret. She called it family madness.
Are you ready for today's session?
But you can't hide from something that knows your name.
Now we'll begin.
She said she saved me by hiding Oz, abandoning it, leaving it to die so that I might live. I see their faces, the witches, the patched-together creature, the man made of tin, the wheeler.
Stay away from us!
I see the same yellow brick road, the same shadows, voices calling from behind the wind. Now Oz is awake again, and whatever began with my grandmother is coming back to finish with me.
If you want to get tickets, you can find a link in the description and get them there. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I want to start by saying that I'm not religious, and I usually dismiss supernatural stories when I hear them. I have always assumed there's a logical explanation for most things, but over the past few weeks, a few things have happened that I genuinely cannot explain, and they've shaken me more than I'd like to admit. A few weeks ago, I was asleep when I heard a loud banging at my front door. It was around 4 in the morning. The sound was so violent and sudden that it jolted me awake immediately. It didn't sound like a casual knock or someone making a mistake. It sounded like an emergency. My heart was already racing as I got out of bed. I grabbed my gun and moved quietly towards the door. I stood to the side of it, keeping the gun hidden behind the frame, and then opened it. But there was no one there. Not a sound could be heard. Not footsteps, not voices, and no movement of any kind. My driveway isn't short, and there's nowhere someone could run without being seen. If it had been someone trying to knock and run, I would have caught them in the act. I opened the door only a few seconds later, after the banging stopped. The silence outside was complete. It freaked me out, but I did force myself to brush it off. I told myself it had to have been the neighborhood kids getting bold with ding-dong ditching. I locked the door again and went back to bed, even though I didn't sleep much after that. Not long after, I noticed my cat began acting strange. She would sit in the living room and stare up at the ceiling for long stretches of time. Sometimes she would meow at it, low and slow, like she was watching something move. But nothing was ever there. No bugs or shadows. It was just the empty ceiling. Then tonight, something happened that I can't make sense of. Earlier in the evening, I cooked a meal. I opened the fridge several times. I know for a fact it was on. After eating, I went upstairs and played some video games on the computer, and around 3 in the morning, my Wi-Fi cut out for a minute. I didn't think much of it. My router does do that sometimes, so I stayed upstairs and kept playing. At around 4:30, my girlfriend got up for work and went downstairs to make herself breakfast. A few minutes later, she came back upstairs and asked me why the fridge was off. I went downstairs with her, already confused. At first, I thought maybe the fridge had broken. Then I looked at the outlet. There are 2 sockets there. Normally the fridge and router are plugged into the lower one, but now the fridge was unplugged, and the router cable had been moved to the upper outlet. The router itself had been unplugged entirely. It looked like someone had physically unplugged the fridge and rearranged the cables. No one else lives with us. Our pets were locked in the room upstairs with us, and no one had gone downstairs after I went to bed. There was no realistic way this could have happened on its own. Standing there in the kitchen staring at the outlet, I felt my stomach drop. Since then, I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me. It's not a thought I want to have, but it keeps creeping in. The house feels different now, like I'm aware of something spiritual residing with us. I still don't want to believe in ghosts, but I can't explain what happened, and I think that's what scares me the most. If someone can come into my house without making a sound, knocking hard enough to wake me from a dead sleep, and move things while we were upstairs, then what else can it do? And is there something I can do that can perhaps make it leave? Today I thought I'd finally share one of my many ghost encounters from Northwest Ohio, back in the early 2000s. At the time, I lived in an old apartment in a historic town. The building itself was historic too, an old downtown structure that had been converted into apartments. My unit was small, just a one-bedroom, one-bath place, with only 2 windows, both of them facing the roof of the building next door. From the beginning, the apartment felt weird. I noticed it, but didn't really dwell on it. It was my first place on my own. I was in college part-time, working full-time, and had a busy social life, a not-serious boyfriend, and my own apartment downtown. I felt proud and independent. Life felt good. That said, I've always struggled with depression, and even when things were going well, it had a way of settling in for months at a time. The strange stuff started slowly, and mostly in the bathroom. I would hear odd noises. The shower door would open or close on its own. Nothing too dramatic at first, just small things that made me pause. Sometimes when I'd be sitting alone at night watching TV, it would feel like there was another person in the room with me. Not a presence I could see, just a strong sense that I wasn't actually alone. Then one night, shortly after I moved in, something happened that changed everything. I was asleep in bed when I heard a noise and felt someone climb into bed behind me. In my half-asleep state, my first thought was that it was my boyfriend. Then I remembered he didn't have a key yet. Perhaps it was my brother. But he would never crawl into bed. If he stayed over, he always slept on the couch. I kept my eyes closed and reached behind me. Bed was empty. Slowly I turned my head over my shoulder. The pillow next to me had a dent in it, like someone's head had just been resting there. The blanket was pressed down beside me, outlining the shape of something that wasn't there. I yanked my hand back, pulled the covers over my head, and stayed frozen like that until the morning. The next day, I stood in my apartment and said it out loud. I told whatever was there that we could live together, but it was not allowed to scare me. No slamming doors, no jump scares, or messing with me while I slept. If we were going to share a space, it had to behave. After that, the apartment quieted down. I could still feel the presence sometimes watching me, but nothing else happened after that night. Then one evening over Christmas, I was lying on the couch with only me and my tree lit. I had just come back from visiting my family and felt incredibly lonely. As I lay there, I could feel someone standing over me. It wasn't threatening, it just felt there. That night I decided to talk. I don't know why, but it felt like a man. Lonely, sad. I talked to him for a long time even though there was no one to answer me. After that, whenever I felt his presence, I would try and talk to him. When I finally moved out, I said goodbye. I asked him to respect the new tenants and to let them live peacefully. Years later, after I'd already moved away, a friend told me that he worked with the sister of a man who had taken his own life in that apartment. He had been lonely and deeply depressed. To this day, I hope he found peace and that he finally left that apartment. When I first rented the apartment, it seemed perfect. It was quiet and clean and in a good area. Nothing about it stood out at first. But not long after moving in, I started feeling uneasy, especially in the basement. I can't fully explain it. It was just a constant feeling of being watched. No matter how many times I told myself I was being paranoid, the feeling never really went away. I shrugged it off and tried not to think about it. A few months later, my son and I came home with groceries. I unlocked the door and immediately noticed something was wrong. Everything that had been hanging on the bedroom walls was gone. The pictures, the decorations, everything had been taken down. We walked further into the apartment towards my daughter's room, and that's when I saw her stuffed animals. They had been stored in one of those hanging nets with holes, but now they were scattered across the floor. Nothing else was disturbed. The furniture was untouched, nothing was missing. I checked the back door and it was still double locked. I laughed it off and joked with my son that maybe the apartment was haunted, even though the pit in my stomach said otherwise. Not long after that, something happened that I will never forget. My daughter, who was 6 at the time, had fallen asleep on the couch. Her dad came over to visit. We were trying to work things out, though he struggled with alcoholism, and after talking for a while, we went into the bedroom and shut the door. And then we heard it. "Mommy." It sounded like my daughter. It was her voice, but there was something peculiar about it, like she was half asleep. I flinged the door open, but the hallway was empty. I ran to the couch. My daughter was still asleep, breathing steadily and completely undisturbed. Her dad went pale. He got dressed without saying much and told me that was it, and refused to ever step foot into the apartment again. Later I asked my upstairs neighbor if he knew anything about the building, and he didn't hesitate. He told me it used to be a church in the 1800s and converted into apartments later on, and that it had been part of an old cemetery that no longer existed. The street was literally named Church Street. The way he said it, it was like he already knew exactly why I was asking, and it made my skin crawl. We moved a few months later. Over a year after that, I finally worked up the courage to research the place for myself. Sure enough, I found records showing the church was built in the 1800s. In 1890, it was deemed inadequate, sawed in half and turned into apartments. Even just sharing this now gives me chills. Whatever was there didn't just move objects. It used my daughter's voice, and it chose that moment to do so. I have never experienced anything like it, before or since, and I would like to keep it that way. Everything I'm about to describe is real. It happened to me and my family. It was the 1980s on the south coast of France, in what people call the French Riviera. Before I was born, my parents were living in Marseille. Back then, it wasn't the trendy city it is today. Crime was high, and the traffic was insane, and the whole place felt loud and crowded. My parents had some money at the time, so they decided to leave the city with my two sisters and buy a large house about 50 kilometers away. They bought a massive mansion in a small coastal town near the sea. It was so close to the beach, you could walk there in 5 minutes. They bought it without even selling their Marseille home. I was conceived in that house, and for a brief time, it was supposed to be our main residence. But my parents started second-guessing their decision. It was in the 80s, the town was isolated, and public transport barely existed. And raising a kid in the middle of nowhere didn't feel practical, so they moved back to Marseille and kept the mansion as a vacation house instead. From then on, we spent every summer there, 2 or 3 months at a time. And despite everything that would happen, some of my best childhood memories are from that house. Friends and family over, beach days, huge dinners. On the surface it was perfect. But the house itself was something else. It was enormous, too big, and too quiet, and from the moment you stepped inside you could feel it. The ground floor had a large open dining area on the left, a bathroom and another room that looked like a small kitchen, and most of these spaces were used as storage. On the right side was a long corridor with a huge bathroom and 2 bedrooms on either side, my parents' room and mine. My bedroom had a large closet with a red light inside that was never changed because the room was barely used before me. Inside my room was another door that led to a second bedroom with twin beds and a glass door that opened directly to the garden. I was a kid, sleeping in the room with a glowing red closet and a hidden bedroom behind another door. I had night terrors, constant nightmares. I hated sleeping alone. The doors never closed properly. My parents said the house was old, the hinges were bad, the locks were weak. But those doors opened by themselves, all the time, and that red closet light turned on and off, whenever it wanted. I would wake up in the middle of the night and see a thin red glow leaking out from under the closet door. But upstairs was worse. At the top of the stairs was a large hall. On the left was a massive dining and living room with an absurdly long table that looked like it belonged in a castle. On the right was a long corridor with 3 bedrooms, a bathroom at the end, and a stained glass round window that cast strange coloured lights into the hallway day and night. That corridor never felt empty. The entire house was surrounded by a garden, but I avoided going into it at night. The house itself already felt too alive. No matter where you were, you could never feel alone. When you opened the front door, it felt like people were standing in the hall. My older sister used to say hello and goodbye when she entered and left, just in case. And in time, I started doing the same. Then came the night that proved it wasn't just in my head. I was 13. My sister had just turned 20, and she invited a group of her friends for a weekend party. It was November, the first time we'd ever stayed there in winter. The Marseille house wasn't available, so we went to the holiday house. There was drinking, some weed, nothing crazy, just friends hanging out. One of the friends went upstairs to use the bathroom. I watched him walk into the corridor and turn the light on. Then a few moments later the corridor light shut off, and then he screamed. Not a startled shout, but a full, terrified scream, as though he thought he were about to perish. And then silence. We all ran upstairs. The only light was coming from the bathroom at the end of the corridor, and we found him in the last bedroom, pale as a corpse and shaking. He kept on repeating that something was there. He couldn't describe it. He just said when he opened the bathroom door, something was standing there and he ran. That was the night I realized I wasn't imagining things. Years passed. I grew up. I was 18 and dating a girl who had a vacation home only a few hundred meters from ours, and we spent the entire summer together. One night, she came over late. We were all on the balcony when she opened the garden gate, and as she walked past my car, she suddenly screamed and started running. When I met her at the door, she was shaking and crying. She told me she saw someone sitting inside my car. When she got closer, the shadow vanished. Another night she came to see me and knocked on the door. When I opened it, no one was there. Then I noticed her hiding behind the couch on the porch, terrified. She said something had grabbed her backpack and nearly pulled her over. That same week, we were stargazing on the balcony when we both saw a white shape climb over the railing and disappear. But the worst night came in the year 2000. I was alone in the house. My girlfriend was staying at her place and I was sleeping in bedroom 3, the one with the balcony. But I couldn't sleep. I kept drifting in and out, and I heard the bathroom door opening and closing. That was normal, it always did that. But then I heard people. At first I thought it was the neighbors. They threw parties all the time, but when I opened the shutters, the street was silent. I lay back down, and the sounds came back clearer and louder, and the voice of someone crying. Then laughter. Then people laughing at someone crying. It was coming from the attic. The attic door was in the corridor ceiling right next to the stained glass window. I grabbed my phone, threw on my jeans and ran downstairs and sprinted into the street. I called my girlfriend and begged for her to let me stay at her place, and I never slept alone in that house again. Before my parents sold it, I spoke with the gardener, who happened to be an old neighbor that had lived across the street his entire life. When I told him we were moving, he said, "I never understood why your parents kept that house for so long." When I asked him why, he told me that as a child he used to close his eyes when he walked past our gates, and that the house terrified him. During World War II, the Nazis had taken the house and used it as an outpost. Prisoners were brought in and never left. No one knows how many. I later confirmed it. My parents sold the house within the year. I've been back to that town many times since, but never walked down that street again. And to this day, my sister and I still dream of this house, and the dreams are never pleasant. The house I grew up in has always had a strange energy. There are always unexplained noises, dark shapes you can see from the corner of your eye, and the constant feeling that you're being watched. Over the years, at least 5 different people have independently told me they saw the same figure, an old grey woman standing in various rooms of the house. I've seen her too. Recently, a friend mentioned seeing her without me ever bringing it up, which was the moment I knew it wasn't just in my head. We eventually found old records showing that a woman lived in this house around 200 years ago. She reportedly had severe OCD and spent most of her time obsessively cleaning the hallways, which is exactly where people have claimed to see her. For most of my life, whatever was here never felt malicious, just watchful. But there's one spot in the house where things have always felt different, and that's the doorway connecting to the kitchen and the middle room. Dogs bark at that corner when there's nothing there. Multiple people have reported seeing strange lights or floating energy in that exact spot. One of my dad's friends even caught something on camera, but deleted it because it scared him too badly. Then, last week, I saw something myself. I watched a tall, blacked-out shadow figure walk straight through the doorway and into the kitchen, and when I followed, it was gone. Today was worse. I was carrying a thick pint glass I've owned for years. I've dropped it plenty of times before and it's never broken. As I stepped into the doorway, The glass suddenly exploded in my hand, shattered into tiny shards that flew in every direction. It cut my hand and my stomach, not badly, but enough to scare me. I showed people the photos afterwards. Every one of them said the same thing. Glass doesn't break like that from being dropped. Now I don't feel calm in that doorway anymore. I don't know if it's some kind of energy or something else entirely, but whatever is there feels powerful and unfriendly now. I just would like it gone. Any suggestions would be very much appreciated. Since moving into an old house in the countryside earlier this year, a few things have happened that I still can't explain. I live here with my boyfriend, but every incident has happened when I was completely alone. I started keeping a list in my phone because I didn't know what else to do, but I haven't told anyone about it yet. I think part of me is afraid of giving it too much attention. I've always believed in the paranormal, but I've never had any experiences before moving into this house. The first time I was sitting on my bed, reading on my Kindle. I suddenly felt the mattress dip beside me, like someone had sat down. I froze, then told myself it was just my imagination. A moment later, I felt the pressure lift, as if whatever had sat down had stood back up. Another night, I was home alone getting ready for bed. I was lying on my left side scrolling on my phone when I felt cold breath against my right ear and heard a whisper say, "Hey." It was quiet, but quite clear. A few days later, I woke up to my pillow slowly being pulled out from under my head. I didn't see anything, but I could feel the movement. And after that, you'd be unsurprised to hear that I chose sleeping in a different room. One afternoon while cleaning the kitchen, I heard my boyfriend come home early from work. I heard him walk down the hallway and call my name from the back bedroom. I felt relieved and called back, "Oh, you're home early." When I walked back there, the room was empty. He was still an hour away, at work. The most recent incident happened last week. I suddenly felt a sharp, pinching sensation on the inside of my upper arm. I thought it was a bug and brushed my arm, but the pinching continued. Without thinking, I said out loud, "Stop!" The feeling immediately went away. The next morning I had a bruise form in the exact spot. It's still there. I don't know what to think about any of it. I don't know if I'm overreacting or if something is actually happening here. All I know is that none of this ever happened before I moved into this house. And every time it happens, I am conveniently alone. What are your thoughts? I live in a small village in England that, according to what I've been able to find online, was once the site of a Roman fort. My family home has always had a strange feeling to it. The constant sense that you're being watched, and the occasional noise you can't quite explain. For years we just brushed it off as an old house doing old house things. But over the last few years, the activity has slowly started to increase. What's strange is that it seems to happen mostly to me, or whenever I come home or leave. I'm in the military, and my parents have mentioned that when I'm away, things are quieter. They still get the odd experience, like hearing the very clear sound of my wardrobe door closing when no one's upstairs, but it never seems as intense as when I'm home. I've had these experiences that I can say with absolute certainty were not normal. The first one happened around midnight. I was in bed with my dog, just scrolling on my phone, half awake and half exhausted, when out of nowhere I heard a soft knock on my bedroom door. I told myself it was nothing. Then it knocked again, and again. 3 knocks in a row, over and over. It was slow and deliberate, and my dog lifted her head and stared at the door. I just lay there frozen listening, and actually managed to get a video of it because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The second time I was home alone, sitting in the conservatory watching TV. It was quite late, already dark out, and suddenly there was a loud knock on the window directly behind me, and my entire body locked up. I didn't move, I didn't even turn around. My mind immediately went to the worst possible image. Someone standing there, staring in at me through the glass. I sat there, heart racing, trying to convince myself it was a bird or a branch or something falling. But nothing hit the window again. The third experience happened when I was around 12. I was coming down the stairs when I heard a massive bang come from the attic. It was loud enough to make me stop halfway down instead of running. I sat on the stairs and listened. A few seconds later, I heard 2 footsteps, clear as day, heel to toe. The sound of someone walking. And then nothing. What makes it worse is that it seems to ramp up whenever my nieces or nephews stay over. Just tonight, my mum ran upstairs because she thought the kids were running around. She was certain she could hear footsteps and movement above her head. But when she checked, they were all in the living room watching TV. I'm sharing this now and still feel on edge. It's never been violent or aggressive, but there's something about the way it feels. Like whenever it knows I'm home alone, and it knows when the house is full. This is a completely true experience. I'm 32 now, but this happened when I was 13. At the time, my family lived in the middle of nowhere in New Hampshire. When we first bought the house, it was a simple 2-story place with 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a massive unfinished basement and garage that matched the footprint of the upper floor. My dad and our neighbor later converted the basement into a full living space with a den, an office, 3 small bedrooms, and a second bathroom. One of those bedrooms became mine. One went to my sister, and the third stayed as a spare room. Not long after the renovation, strange things started happening. The most terrifying experience happened late one night, after I had already fallen asleep. My room was set up so that the door was in the left corner of the wall. When you walked in, my desk was immediately to the right, then my dresser with a TV on top, and my bed sat on the opposite corner across the room. I usually slept facing the wall with my back to the door. That night, I woke up suddenly with an overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. I rolled over instinctively and let my eyes adjust to the dark. I didn't have a nightlight or the TV on, but I did have one of those old DirecTV cable boxes with a small green light. It wasn't enough to light the room, but it cast just enough glow towards the doorway that I could see a black silhouette standing there. I could make out the torso, shoulders and head. At first I wasn't scared. Earlier that day my mum had been teasing me because I was too old to kiss her anymore, and she joked that she had snuck into my room the night before and kissed my cheek while I slept. So when I saw the shadow I genuinely thought it was her. I got excited and decided I was going to pretend to sleep and then jump and scare her. The shadow stood in the doorway for about 10 seconds. That alone already felt strange. Then it stepped into the room, stopping beside my desk. I remember thinking maybe she had heard me roll over and was waiting to see if I was awake before coming closer. But then it stood there again motionless for another long moment. That's when I started wondering if it was my dad instead trying to mess with me. Then it moved again, directly in front of my desk. Now I was getting uneasy. The green light from the cable box was shining right through the middle of its body. Then it took one final step to the left, and that's when I froze. The green light was still visible through the center of its torso. I went from excited to absolutely paralyzed in an instant. My heart was pounding. My body felt locked in place and I couldn't breathe. I still get chills thinking about it. It felt like an eternity, but after what was probably 15 to 30 seconds, I forced myself out of bed. The light switch was right next to the door. As I stood up and moved towards it, the shadow turned and walked out of my room. There was a door immediately to the right that led into the den. I flipped the light on just as it passed through the doorway and I followed it instantly. 2 or 3 seconds later, the den was empty. It was an open room with a couch, a chair, an old wooden stair that was incredibly loud to walk on, and I heard nothing. No footsteps or movement upstairs, just silence. I went back to my room, turned my TV on and stayed awake for a long time. Eventually, my parents asked why I suddenly slept with the TV on every night. I finally told them what happened. At the time, my mum was into pagan spirituality and believed me immediately. Now, she's a hardcore Christian and says it must have been a demon. I don't know what the hell it was, but it scared the hell out of me. And to this day, I still sleep with the TV on. I've set up a timer so it shuts off after I fall asleep, but I can't fall asleep in total darkness anymore. That night definitely changed something within me. Back in 1998, my family and I didn't own a house, so we were renting an apartment. It was an ordinary place during the day, but at night, it became something else entirely. Almost every night after 10, I would hear chaos coming from the kitchen. The unmistakable sound of utensils clattering, plates rattling, and objects shifting, as if someone were moving them through the room. It happened often, always late, and always when everyone in the apartment was supposed to be asleep. But the thing is, no one else ever heard it. Not my parents, not the babysitter. It seemed that only I could ever hear it. At first, I thought perhaps it was the pipes or animals in the wall. That's what everyone always tells me. But the thing is, the sounds were so sharp, and it was exceedingly obvious that they were exactly and exclusively what I had heard. Not long after the noises began, I had a dream that shook me deeply. I saw a half-burnt body. It was burnt badly, lying in the exact place where our apartment now stood. The image disturbed me in ways that I can't even begin to explain. It didn't feel like my imagination. It felt more like a memory that had been inflicted upon me. Then one night while I was still awake, I saw a reflection in the glass window. It wasn't my own. It looked like a distorted human figure, burned and twisted, barely recognizable. I froze. That was the moment my family decided we needed to leave. We moved into a house that had belonged to my grandfather. It felt safer at first, but it came with its own strange behavior. Late at night, I would sometimes watch the doorknobs turn on their own, and every time it happened, I would creep towards the door and open it, expecting to see someone standing there. But as you've probably guessed, no one ever was. Around that time, our neighbors started telling us that they sometimes saw shadow figures around our house. One evening, my mother drove into town alone. Later, when she returned, a neighbor came rushing over and asked her who the woman was that had been sitting beside her in the car. My mother impressed upon her that she had been alone, and the neighbor was quite as shaken as my mum. Next door, another house had been vacant for years after the owners moved abroad. The surrounding neighbors complained of footsteps echoing through the empty rooms and unexplained noises coming from inside. The property was cleansed and blessed multiple times, but the disturbances continued. Eventually, an apartment building was constructed behind our backyard. The tenants who moved in would talk about strange tapping sounds and light switches turning on and off by themselves. They didn't know our history, though, and assumed it was just faulty wiring. But I knew better. I am sharing this to see if anyone has had experiences similar to mine, or if there could be a logical explanation for what I grew up with. I was raised in northern Michigan, in a house built sometime between the 1900s and 1905. I've never been able to find any records of death or anyone officially abnormally connected to the property, but a lot of strange things happened here when I was a kid, and I for one have never been able to fully make sense of them. Let me take you back to when I was 8 years old. I started seeing what I can only describe as shadow people. It happened almost every night, and continued until I was around 10. They were completely silent, about 8 feet tall, and didn't seem aggressive. They would just walk around my room as if they belonged there. I shared the room with my older brother, and he never saw them, which was how I knew they couldn't be real. But that didn't make them any less terrifying. What scared me even more was what happened when I closed my eyes. Instead of darkness, I would see a vivid scene play out like a movie. I was sitting at a bar, facing a staircase that led down into what looked like a basement speakeasy. A figure would start walking down the stairs, but I could only see its shadow. I knew somehow that it was the devil. Every time I would force myself to open my eyes before it reached the bottom, and when I closed them again, the scene would restart from the beginning and would loop over and over. If I looked away from the center of my room where the shadow figures stood, I would then see bugs and spiders crawling up my sheets towards me. The hallucinations were so vivid that eventually I just learned to endure them. Even now, I can't explain how real they felt. Bats were another constant presence in the house. They were my mum's biggest fear. And yet every year, sometimes multiple times a year, bats would somehow get inside. We had several companies inspect the house, and every single one confirmed that there were no entry points, nothing in the attic, and no reasons bats should be getting in. We were careful about keeping doors and windows closed, especially at night, and still, they kept appearing. My bed was against the exterior wall, and several nights a week, I could hear scratching from inside. I was also a very sensitive kid emotionally. I don't know if that's what people mean when they say someone can sense spirits, but I was always aware when something felt present near me. Sometimes I would test it. I would ask it to open a door or make a noise, and a lot of the time, something would happen. Once I was in the bathroom with the door cracked open. I felt like something was standing on the other side. I asked it to open the door, and a moment later the door slowly swung open about 6 inches. I remember thinking that I should be far more scared than I was. On another night, I was leaving the upstairs bathroom and I saw a leg, from the knee down, disappear around the corner ahead of me. It looked bizarre, discolored. The next day I told my parents and they say, "Oh yeah, the kids." When I told them everyone had been asleep and the leg looked strange, they said, "No, that's just what we call them. We believe you." I was around 10 at the time and didn't understand what they meant. I didn't ask further. There were many more things I could talk about, but these were the most consistent and vivid. I still don't know if there's a logical explanation for any of it, or if the house really was haunted. I just wanted to understand what I was living with for so many years. Before I moved to Oregon, and before I lived in this house, I didn't really believe in the paranormal. To me, ghost stories were just entertainment. They don't feel that way anymore, though. So in 2018, I moved to Central Oregon and rented a room in the attic of a house that had been built around 1840. I was a broke college student and the rent was cheap. The house had 12 roommates in total. When I moved in, the other girls warned me that strange things happened there, but I brushed it off. At first, it was small things. We would wake up to find the second-story balcony door wide open, even though it was still deadbolted. Chairs from the first floor would appear on the second floor with no explanation, and I assumed my roommates were messing with each other. Then, Thanksgiving came. Out of all 12 of us, I was the only one who stayed in the house for the holidays. That morning, I woke up freezing and went downstairs to turn up the thermostat. As I was pressing the buttons, I heard two women talking nearby. I stopped and listened, trying to figure out which roommates were home. I heard one of them say very clearly, "He's coming." I don't remember anything else they said. That sentence is the only thing that struck. I walked through the house, checking every room, until I became aware that I was fully alone. I spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself I had simply imagined it. I told myself I was just exhausted. That night, I was sitting on the living room couch with my roommate's kitten in my lap, petting her. Suddenly, she went completely rigid. I look up and see a shadow on the window. It was inky black, like it was on the glass itself, not a reflection, and not someone standing outside. I stared at it, and I had the distinct feeling that it was looking back at me. Then it moved across the window and disappeared. I called my only friend who was still in town, and she came over. After that, the house changed. Whenever I went into the basement, I felt like something was watching me. One night my roommate saw a man standing in what we call the catacombs, a long, zigzagging hallway that led from the main basement to the basement apartment. She called the police, but the police never found anyone. In the attic, my bed was in a small triangle-shaped room. At night it sounded like someone was dragging their fingernails along the ceiling directly above my head. Things started going missing. One night all the fish in my roommate's fish tank died at the same time. I began hearing whispers throughout the house, but I could never understand what they were saying. One day, my roommates climbed out onto the roof through a window that didn't lock. When they tried to come back inside, the windows wouldn't open. They were stuck out there for hours, yelling for help, until I got home. I opened the windows easily and couldn't understand how it had been stuck. When the lease ended, we all moved out and swore to never return. But sometimes when I'm nearby, I still feel drawn to the house. I'll stop outside and stare up at the window of what used to be my bedroom. During college, my best friend, our mutual boyfriend, and myself rented an extremely old house. It must have been built in the early 1900s. It sat at a strange crossroads, 1 block from the rough part of town, 1 block from the student-heavy party streets, and just far enough towards the nicer neighborhoods that people constantly passed through. Friends were always coming and going. It never felt isolated, which made what happened there harder to ignore. My best friend was interested in paranormal topics, but was quite practical and level-headed. Our mutual boyfriend was neutral, open-minded, and not invested. I, of the trio, was the skeptic. I had experienced odd things before, but nothing I considered solid proof. I assumed there must be a logical explanation for everything. The knocking started almost immediately after we moved in. For nearly a month, none of us realized it was happening to all three of us. It always happened when someone was alone, usually in a bedroom or the bathroom. Most often it came from the bathroom door or the door connected to the male best friend's room. It never came from the exterior doors. You would always hear 3 slow knocks, and we'd answer, "Who is it?" or "Come in." But there was never any reply, save an additional knock. At first, we all assumed different things, pranks, old house noises, or imagination. We were 22 after all. Then one night, while sitting together and smoking, my best friend mentioned the knocking. We all stopped and stared at each other. We realized we were describing the exact same thing, the same pattern, the same few doors, and the same strange silence after we got no reply. We laughed it off. It didn't feel threatening yet. My best friend suggested it could be paranormal. Our male best friend shrugged and said perhaps, whereas I dismissed it completely. But it kept happening. And now it happened when people could physically see there was no one on either side of the door. That night it escalated. My best friend and I were on the couch watching TV. Male best friend was in his bedroom with all 3 doors shut. One opened into the bathroom, and one into the living room, and one into my bedroom. From where we sat, we could clearly see his closed bedroom door and the open bathroom doorway. No one was in either space. Suddenly, he shouted, "Come in!" We hadn't heard any knocking, which wasn't unusual, only the person closest ever did. And a moment later he yelled again, louder and irritated. Then there was a violent crash from his room like something heavy being thrown. Less than a second later, he burst out of his bedroom, slammed into the living room and stopped against the far wall. He was breathing hard, eyes wide and shaking. He said the knocking had come from 2 doors at once. When he grabbed the bathroom door to open it, it was ripped out of his hands and slammed shut with impossible force. The knocking never stopped after that. Guests heard it, responded to it. Eventually, we told people not to answer, just to open the door. Then there was the baby crying. It only happened when someone was lying down, never while walking around. The first time, I was lying down during the day drifting towards sleep when I heard a baby crying. It sounded extremely close, like just outside the house. I checked my best friend's room, then the window. I could hear it clearly but saw nothing. We assumed it was a neighbor. The sound was too real not to be. It kept happening mostly during the day. I mentioned it casually. My best friend said she had heard it too, and our male best friend admitted he had as well. After the knocking incident, he decided to ask the neighbors. They were 3 elderly men. No baby, no reason for anyone to be crying, and they denied ever hearing anything. At that point, we asked everyone who spent time in the house, and almost all of them had heard it, always while lying down, never while standing. We traced the sound repeatedly, inside and outside. The loudest point was always from one specific exterior wall beside my best friend's room. From inside, it sounded like it was just beyond the wall, and from the outside, it sounded like it was coming from the inside. The sound eventually was connected to the basement, the worst place in the house. But even before we understood that, we knew something was wrong. Sadly, like most good stories, there was never really a fitting conclusion. We never found out where the sound truly came from or what the cause was. But I am glad that we no longer live there, as it was quite a frightening ordeal. I am from New Zealand, and ever since I was a kid, I've seen things, shadows, figures, things that look like ghosts or demons or something pretending to be human. And now I know how that sounds. I know people assume imagination, dreams, and mental illness. But I've lived in a house that was widely known in the neighborhood to be haunted for 9 years, from the time I was 5 until I was 14. My first clear experience happened when I was around 8. I only found out recently while talking with my parents that our neighbors had always known that the house had a reputation. No one ever told us while we lived there. Now, it doesn't seem to matter whether my eyes are open or closed, whether I'm fully awake, half asleep, or exhausted. I see faces. I see things watching me. I see figures that look like they're prepared to attack, even in my dreams. Something paranormal always appears at some point. There's one specific presence that has followed me for years. I don't know what it is, and I refuse to research it because I am genuinely afraid of finding out. The closest thing I can compare it to is a cross between La Llorona and the nun from The Conjuring. But I saw it years before I even knew those characters existed. The first time I saw it, I was between 8 and 10. In a dream, I was standing in one of the rooms of the house. The figure was trapped in a corner. It began levitating while staring directly at me. Then suddenly we switched places, and I was floating where it had been, and it stood where I had been standing. My dreams are very graphic and disturbingly violent and real. The only thing that ever makes me feel safe in them is singing hymns, but even that has started to fail. I've tried talking to my parents, but they don't help, and doctors and medication, but if anything, it's only made things worse. I am exhausted. I'm desperate. I live only 3 houses away from that old home now, and I am deeply traumatized. I suffer depression and never feel safe in any house I live in, no matter where I go. The house itself has a history. It was originally a morgue or funeral home connected to the cemetery up the road sometime in the 1800s or early 1900s. The room my family slept in was reportedly where bodies were prepared. A woman was also said to have taken her own life just outside the room many years ago. 11 of us lived in that house. It was enormous with a strange layout. The garage was the size of 2 classrooms and filled wall to wall with junk when we moved in. When we cleared it out, we found piles of toilet seats, medical cabinets, ancient tools, old bed frames, chairs, and furniture that looked like it belonged in the 1890s. The backyard terrified me the most. Whenever I stood in the kitchen at night and looked outside, I felt like a woman in white was watching me. I never once shook that feeling, even as I got older. We had downstairs tenants who never stayed longer than 2 years. They always complained of whispering, of doors slamming. They originally assumed it was us, because the whispers were apparently in Fijian, until they heard our language and realized that no one in the house spoke it. 4 or 5 different tenants moved in and out below us. Our landlord eventually confirmed the house was haunted, but only after we moved out. We were the longest tenants the house ever had. I have carried whatever follows me there into every home I have lived in since. I only ever feel safe outside, never indoors. I don't know what this is. I don't know how to make it stop. I just know that it all started in that house. From the time I was a child until about 24 years old, I used to see ghosts. They weren't vague shapes or quick shadows in my peripheral vision, but full-bodied, full-color figures. Some stood still, some walked. Some were humans, others were animals. I saw them clearly and repeatedly, and I also saw shadow figures moving in front of me. At my parents' house, I experienced both full apparitions and physical disturbances. Objects would be thrown without any visible cause. Noises would come from empty rooms, and often there would be other people present who would confirm what I was seeing or hearing. They would hear the same sounds. They would watch objects move. Sometimes they would see something themselves. I had dozens of experiences there, and what's strange is that I didn't grow out of it. I just saw as many spirits as 20 as I did at 7. But in my mid-20s it stopped. I had lived in my parents' house for years, then moved to my own house in the next town over. The activity followed me. I continued having frequent experiences, but when I moved out of state, things changed. In that new house, I only had 2 experiences and never saw any apparition. After that, I moved again, and only had 1 experience. Now I've moved once more again, still out of my home state, and so far I've had no experiences whatsoever. What confuses me is how abruptly it all ceased. Is it possible that my parents' house was simply extremely haunted? Even after I moved out, I was still visiting multiple times a week. Maybe whatever was there stayed attached to that place, and by extension to me. And once I moved 4 hours away, and visited only once a year, everything stopped. My parents' house was built in the mid-1970s. The previous owner's wife died there, although I never saw her spirit. I don't know how many owners lived there before my family. The next house I lived in was built in the 60s, had had many owners, and had been a rental before I bought it. The house I moved into out of state, I was the second owner, and bought it from the original who was still alive. The next place I lived was an apartment built by the same people I rented from. They were both still alive. My current house was built in 1967. I don't know much about its history, other than it was foreclosed and later seized by the town from the bank, and we've only lived here about a month. For nearly 20 years, the paranormal was a consistent presence in my life, and then without warning it faded away. I'm not saying I'm displeased, I just wish I understood why. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's collection of scary stories. Just to let you all know that next week on the 12th of January, we are going to have 5 days where we are back in the woods. From Monday to Friday that week, we're going to have brand new scary stories, so I hope to see you there. Until then, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.